Good morning. This will be a video lecture discussion of the Financial Management Study Plan. In college, one of the most important things to realize is that financial responsibilities differ from person to person, and as a result, these are another of the things that we simply have to assume are individual based on the fact that there is so much diversity in the group of college students at our college and otherwise. Now, some of these responsibilities change depending on the moment in life we're in, where others stay basically the same, and it's up to us to realize what that balance is for ourselves, but also to note that that balance changes from person to person. So, being aware of both financial and other diversity means assuming difference. We can't assume that we know what others are doing and what sort of financial situation they're in based on how they dress, where they go, etc. As we grow, remember that our conditions of our lives go in unexpected ways, some large, some small. Lastly, financial diversity, therefore, has to be understood as the understanding of other diversities, too. There are several important terms in this chapter that are worth knowing, the first and foremost of which you're probably already aware of. This is tuition, or the money that we pay to be in the classes we take. Other institution related fees often include things like housing and transportation. There's room and board, which is what we would pay if we were living on campus. Book and supply costs are often much higher than we realize they will be, even after textbooks. This includes things like pens, pencils, notebooks, folders, and even a computer or laptop, tablet, or phone. And generally, it's in that last part of the spending, the technological part, where that can get much higher than we realized it would. However, these things are facts of the educational atmosphere today. You simply need to either have them or have good access to them. With all of those expenditures coming up, generally we all need to take out loans for college, and where those loans come from can differ. Generally, we want to look for subsidized loans, and these are loans that allow deferral of payment for up to 6 months after graduation. Generally, these loans also do not accrue interest. It's not like for every single day we're in college the interest grows. A subsidized loan stays at the principal amount rather than having that interest added to it. These loans, though, can be difficult to get. Generally speaking, they're given out to people who have proven themselves deserving or otherwise. It's more likely that we'll be offered unsubsidized loans, and these loans accrue interest while we're in college. We've got to be careful with these. Lastly, bank loans can be possibilities, but again, these are generally unsubsidized. So if we can get the subsidized ones, those are the ones we want. Now, the other option we've got during school is, of course, working, and lots of us do this, particularly in SUNY Erie. Actually, the percentage of people with more than one job is quite high. The pros of working are pretty straightforward and pretty obvious. This could help us to be able to break even and keep us in the mindset of getting things done. Work experience could be helpful. You could work in the same field that hopefully you plan to get into after you finish your degree. The money is beneficial because, of course, you've got to pay for other costs in addition to college. And this can also give one a sense of purpose. Basically, it allows one to be comfortable with the worth of a hard day's labor, and that's a good thing to be aware of, regardless of what you're doing in life. The cons are similarly obvious. Number one, working means that by default you're in danger of overworking yourself. You have to make sure at all times that your priorities are straight with school on top. Grades are forever where jobs are temporary. Time constraints and finding the right balance can be very tricky. Not being able to schedule in study time and work time can detract from both things. And lastly, working a job can make it hard to take a break, especially when you need it the most. The other thing to realize with managing finances and managing a financial situation that's gotten much more complex as one moves into college is the idea that expenses can happen more frequently, they could be larger, and it's more likely that we haven't encountered them before. That makes these expenses ones that we don't count on. There are things like one's car breaking down, unexpected illness, food or other consumables needing to be bought, an injury, extreme inflation, changes to insurance rates, taxes, housing issues. And there are certainly others, but that's just a selection of those that a first time college student is likely to encounter. Like I said, these are difficult because generally speaking, these are expenses we have not encountered before, and it means that we probably haven't made preparations for them when they come. The other important fact that this indicates is the fact that we've got to be able to develop and maintain a budget. Otherwise, we're never going to be ready for even those expenses that we have encountered before. Now, there are 5 stages of budget management, the first of which is determining goals. I've said often throughout this semester that budgeting time is much the same as budgeting money, and here it is yet again. The same way that we had to know what our priorities were for budgeting time, we've got to know what those priorities are for budgeting money. The establishment of our budget and the paying of the money we make has to directly coincide with the goals we have. The other points worth making here have to do with the fact that there are both long term and short term goals, and being able to differentiate between the two of those is going to help us to be able to determine how our budget looks and how our money gets spent. Right? Our long term goals are probably the more important ones, but they're also the ones that we can, afford to plan for based on the long term. There's less money involved there if we're putting little bits of money away all the time. Whereas short term goals are often those that present themselves right at the moment. They're goals that correspond to things that we have to be able to pay money for right at the moment. And they're going to be more difficult at the moment given that we don't have the amount of time that we would with the long term goal to budget the money, put it aside, and otherwise make sure that it's there. The next step is determining categories. I've gone in multiple different directions here with how to do this and landed on the 50-30-20 budget as one that's both practical and effective. That is to say that 50% of our money would go to the things that we need each month. 30% of our money would go to our wants, that is, the things that we desire. And lastly, 20% of our money per month would go to debt and or savings. To repeat, being able to do this is all about having a system that you use and keep using. There are lots of different tricks that people develop for this, and one of those is the envelope system, which you'll see a video on as you do the reading, so check that out. Once we've determined our categories, we want to be able to make adjustments because of the fact that not everything is the same month to month. Take a look out the window and you'll be faced with a reminder that the weather is quite fickle, right? So this means being able to make adjustments for things like fuel, heating, food, gas, etc., right? The little things that might be fairly consistent but are never quite the same. The next step is factoring infrequent expenses, and like I said before, these are things like taxes, insurance, healthcare, vacations, and clothing. Finally, we have to try to account for the unexpected, though by default we can't do that because they are unexpected. And these are things like auto and home repairs and medical bills. Now, to move into a last part of our discussion, I wanted to take a look at credit and debt. You will at some point get yourself a credit card, and there are a ton of options out there, such that you can actually look for a credit card that fits your lifestyle and spending needs, and it's almost guaranteed that it exists, again, because of the number of credit cards out there in the world. Now, the pros of this is that you've got to have credit history for the bigger things you'll do in life, and that includes things like buying a house and buying a car. Without adequate credit history, you won't be able to do either thing, particularly on the housing side. The cons include the fact that money you don't have to work for is actually really easy to spend, and with credit cards, you actually work for it after the fact, right? So anytime you do use a credit card for some spending, think about that in terms of how long it will take you to pay it off afterwards, and that's often a good idea. It can be a way of making sure that you understand the cost after the fact instead of just using the credit card and not thinking much about it at the moment. There are several options out there for if your credit spending leads to too much debt, the first of which is loan consolidation. This can last longer and be subject to a higher interest rate. The advantage, though, is that it means that it's a little easier to pay off because the overall payments are lower each month. After just loan consolidation, sometimes we find that it helps to contract with a credit counselor, and this is basically a financial advisor who, for a price, can help us to set up budgeting and payment plans to pay off a debt. If neither the consolidation nor the counselor is enough, there is debt settlement, and this is where a debtor pays a lump sum rather than the total debt owed. The lump sum payment will be less than the total that's owed. However, it is often still very significant and very high. It's not like this is so low that one might as well pay it rather than paying off the credit card debt. Lastly, there is the option of bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is a legal status. It's defined and protected by the law. It's actually broken into two different statuses. There is Chapter 13 bankruptcy, where one keeps one's assets and uses a 3 to 5 year 3 to 5 year payment plan. Lastly, there's Chapter 7, and usually this form of bankruptcy goes hand in hand with really big debt problems. This is where one surrenders one's assets, one's credit score is lowered significantly for a period of time, and lastly, this can be very costly because of necessary lawyers, legal fees, etc. Neither bankruptcy option is a good idea unless it's absolutely necessary. We're always better off finding a way to pay the credit card debt ourselves when we can. This has been a discussion of the Financial Management Study Plan. I invite you to ask any questions of me in office hours, in the discussion board for our class, or any other way you can. If you need to, I'd be happy to answer those. In the meantime, please, keep me informed of what's going on. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.